everybody. We're so glad to see you all back here at the McFaddin-Ward House. This is our first lecture in our series that begins for the fall 2024 to spring 2025. So we're thrilled to have you here tonight, and we're thrilled we aren't waiting or in a boat or anything else. Yes, ma'am. So I'm Belle Maureen. I'm the programming director here, and we are just delighted to have you here tonight to take a glimpse into the fabulous, one of the nation's treasures, the Washington National Cathedral, with our esteemed presenter, Kevin Eckstrom. We're just thrilled. But before that, y'all know I have to plug stuff before we start. So upcoming, we've got an October lecture. It'll feature textile expert and craftswoman Rabbit Goody. And as stated in the Smithsonian Magazine, Thistle Weavers, founded by Rabbit Goody, makes textiles for movies, TV shows, historic houses, and high-end clothing and furniture companies. What sets this mill apart from others is Goody's remarkable ability to animate the past. So it should be a really interesting lecture, a little different from what we've had. Following that lecture, the next day, we're going to have a textile workshop where you can bring your family treasures here, and Rabbit will take a look at them. She'll tell you what the age is on them, what they're made out of, and how to conserve them. So quilts, tablecloths, really cool things you've got stored probably in a chest somewhere. Then on October 18th, we have Jimmy Simmons back here again, and so much fun in the gardens in the evening, so it's just so much fun, and we're thrilled Jimmy was going to join us again. And then on November 1st, we're going to be dancing in the grass, because we're going to have Jivin' Gene back again. And if you all don't know Jivin' Gene, he is incredible, and he is so much fun. And one of his most famous songs that he wrote is Breaking Up is Hard to Do, so that tells you who Jivin' Gene is if you don't know. So I'm going to stop right here because we've got things going on all through the Christmas holidays, but I really want to hear Kevin. So there's some sheets out in the foyer that have all the listings up and through Christmas, so you can pick one of those up. We hope you'll come join us. Admission is always free here at the museum, thanks to the underwriting, the very generous underwriting from the Mamie McFaddin-Ward Heritage Foundation. So at this time, I'd like to ask you to silence your phones, and please welcome our Executive Director, Tony Chavot.
Thanks, Bill. I want to join her in the welcome to this evening's lecture, the first lecture in the 2024-2025 series. And like Belle, I can assure you you're in for a real treat this evening. And like Belle, as always, I want to acknowledge the generosity of the Mamie McFaddin-Ward Heritage Foundation, who not only funds the maintenance and operation of the museum, but also all of our programming throughout the year, ensuring that everything we do here is free and open to the public. We have with us this evening several members of our board who deserve your recognition and thanks. Leslie Wilson, our board chair, is right there. Behind her, Martha Hicks. And I hope I'm not missing anyone else, but we thank them for their service. They do a great job here. We also want to acknowledge the presence this evening in the overflow room of the Deaf Education Department at Lamar University. They are observing the lecture and also getting some practice on sign language, and so we welcome them and their valuable work here. The McFaddin-Ward family's ties to this evening's lecture run deep through their longtime affiliation with St. Mark's Episcopal Church here in Beaumont. As most of you know, Washington National Cathedral, the world's sixth largest Gothic cathedral, is an active member of the Episcopal Church. The idea for a sacred home for all Americans in the nation's capital is as old as the nation itself. Pierre Lafont's original design for a new capital city included a, quote, great church for national purposes. an idea that sat idle until 1893, when a congressional charter authorized a cathedral dedicated to religion, education, and charity. But construction did not begin until 1907, when President Theodore Roosevelt helped lay the foundation stone. Through world wars, the Great Depression, and immense social change, construction ended exactly 83 years after it began, when President George H.W. Bush oversaw the laying of the final stone atop the towers in 1990. Today, most Americans know the cathedral as a grand, sacred place where a country gathers during moments of national significance. Our speaker this evening, who I might add courageously flew into Houston as a Cat 2 hurricane threatened the region, holds degrees from the George Washington University and the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism. He joined the Washington National Cathedral in 2015 as Chief Communications Officer and became Chief Public Affairs Officer in 2023. In this role, he oversees all external cathedral engagement, strategic messaging, media relations, crisis communications, and the award-winning Cathedral Age magazine. In other words, he's a really busy guy. Please welcome Kevin Eckstrom. Kevin?
Good evening. Good evening. It's awfully nice of you all to let a Yankee come to town. I promise you my name is not Francine. But no, really, it's great to be here. This is a part of Texas that I've not spent a ton of time in, but I have been to Orange before, of all places. I had a friend from high school who grew up in Orange, so it's good to be back. And I drove down I-10 last night and I saw the water tower, so feels familiar. So just, I want to say this at the outset. I've got a couple of things to talk about and some pretty pictures to show you. But if you have a question or a comment or a head scratcher, please feel free to jump in. This is a conversation more than a college lecture, so feel free to ask me whatever you can, and I will, as we say at the cathedral, everything at the cathedral is at least 40% true. So I will make it up if I don't know the answer. First question, actually, for y'all. How many people have been to the cathedral before? All right. Thanks be to God, we got a bunch of Episcopalians in the room. Well, for those of you who haven't been there, on behalf of the bishop and the dean of the cathedral, you're more than welcome to come, and we would love to see you there, and let me know if you're coming, and I will take you up to the top of the towers, and we'll go see gargoyles and bells and all sorts of things. So you have a personal invitation for a VIP tour. Just let me know. So make sure I know how to. Hold on. It's not changing. Oh, clicked on. That would help. There we go. So, as the McFaddins were moving into this house, right around 1907, this house was being started. As Tony said, the idea for the National Cathedral, or a National Cathedral, is as old as the country itself. George Washington dispatched Pierre L'Enfant, who was a French architect, to design Washington, D.C. And when he did, he laid out a spot in the city for where he thought the church should go. And on his map, which I'll show you, he actually detailed what this church was supposed to do. And it was supposed to be a place where Americans could gather for prayer, where we could have public ceremonies. He even mentioned funerals, and that we could celebrate the ideals of America and the faith that sustains it. When he did that, Washington, D.C. was a swamp, literally. and there were probably about 50 people who lived there. So this idea for this great church for national purposes laid dormant for about 100 years until a bunch of Episcopalians and business leaders got together and decided to actually put some flesh on those bones. So this is the outside. You've probably seen it on TV. And this is what she looks like when she gets dressed up inside. The thing about the cathedral, and the thing that I want to talk to you about tonight, is that the cathedral tells two stories simultaneously in its art, in its architecture, and in its mission. Now, we're a cathedral. Y'all are a bunch of Episcopalians, so you'll understand it's a church, right? So there is the story that we tell of faith and our walk with God across time through history. The other story that the cathedral tells is our walk together as Americans, American history, and particularly the moments when Americans lived into the aspirations that we all claim to want, and also some of the times where we haven't been able to do that. But it's supposed to be a place that embodies the best of America and the best of our ideals. So during the dark days of the COVID pandemic, the cathedral was actually closed for 18 months. DC had a law that you could have no more than 10 people in a building at a time. So for 18 months, the building was closed and we did everything online. When the building reopened, this was the exhibit that we had going on. It's called Les Colombes, which is French for the doves, and we had 2,000 doves hanging from the ceiling. And it was exactly the right thing that we needed as the country was in a really, really dark place. And so as we were reopening, as things were coming back to life, we had these doves to sort of help people see something that was a little bit more optimistic. This is a more or less current picture of what the cathedral actually looks like this week. It's as beautiful on the outside as it is on the inside. Everything in the cathedral is handmade. Nothing is prefab. You can't buy any of this at Walmart or Home Depot. Everything you see has been touched by human hands. So when I was a kid, I had an aunt and uncle who lived just outside of DC in Rockville. And we would go down to visit them. And the one place that I remember going when I was about 8 years old was the cathedral. And I still remember the first sculpture that I saw. But one of the tour guides was giving this sort of apocryphal story of, why do you need all that detail? Especially on the stuff that's 100 feet off the ground that nobody's going to actually be able to see. Like, why the craftsmanship? Why spend all that time and energy to make it look that way? And the answer that they gave was, well, God sees it. And the higher you're up to God, so you got to make sure you get that right. So yeah, everything is handcrafted. And we'll talk a little bit about the construction and how it's all held together. I'm going to go back one. So, as Tony said, the cathedral is one of our big challenges as an institution is that we have multiple identities, and they're all true. It's kind of like having a bunch of different kids that you all love equally, and they're all true. We are a church, a Christian church. We are an architectural landmark. We are a national site. We are a top 10 tourist destination. We're an event space. We hold concerts. We do art exhibits. We have 3 schools that are associated with the cathedral. All of those things are true. But at the end of the day, the thing that is most true, the thing that really matters, is what you see in that picture there on the left, a house of prayer for all people. And that is our motto, and that is what the cathedral was founded to do. So yes, it is Christian, but our major services, our major national services are all interfaith by design. So you will have a Jewish rabbi, a Christian minister, and a Muslim imam all participating and all offering their prayers in that space. If you come on Sunday morning at 11:15, you're going to get right to from the Book of Common Prayer. But for those big national moments, the idea is that every American, no matter what faith you are, or if you have no faith, can find a home in the cathedral. It's also one of the few places where everyone in Washington is on their best behavior. You can put Nancy Pelosi next to John Roberts, and they will get along. You can put George Bush and Barack Obama, and they will hug. And what we like about that is that it points us to what we wish our politics could be, right? And what you see in the cathedral is a vision of what we want that to be. Also, the way that most people know us, if they see us on TV, is this is the place where we hold presidential funerals. And that is, this is the sacred ground where America can come together to mourn the losses, but also to celebrate the lives of these American heroes. So John McCain, George H.W. Bush, Colin Powell, Madeleine Albright, you name it. We do not have to have a state funeral at the cathedral. President can be buried anywhere they want. The family ultimately chooses. But we are equipped and trained on how to do a presidential funeral. So let's go back in time just a little bit. Pierre L'Enfant, we mentioned him. This is him here. And if you see that purple circle there, that was the spot that he identified for where this great church for national purposes was going to be. And the purple square, that's actually where we ended up. Because after 100 years of this dream laying dormant, the Episcopalians got together and went to Pierre L'Enfant's site, and it was occupied. Downtown had finally grown out, so there was no room. So the land where the cathedral now sits, it was actually farmland back in the day. And it's also the highest point in Washington, D.C., highest geographical point. And the bishop at the time, Bishop Satterlee, said, well, laws may be made on Capitol Hill, but God is going to keep an eye on them from an even higher hill. And so that's how we ended up where we are. Teddy Roosevelt was there September 29th, 1907, to lay the foundation stone. And every president since William McKinley has come to the cathedral for one occasion or another, and I'll show you there in a little bit. On the left there, you see what the original design for the cathedral is. And if you've seen the cathedral, you might notice that it's a little bit different, but it's more or less the same. The main difference is that center arch portal was recessed in the original design. It has since been brought out. But this was 83 years of construction. It is the longest running construction project in Washington, D.C. history, and it is all privately funded. So for a long time, the cathedral was known as Washington Cathedral, and it is officially, all right, pop quiz. What makes a cathedral a cathedral? Anyone? It is the seat of a bishop, that's right. So it's not the size, it's not the style, it's not how big it is, it's where the bishop sits. So one of the reasons why we have this cathedral is because this was a new diocese. The Diocese of Washington had just been created, and every diocese needs a cathedral. So they sort of took the two ideas, put them together, and here we are. The building was built in reverse order, so that at the far end, the east end, is the oldest part of the cathedral. The cathedral that you see on TV with the two towers, that's actually the newest end. One of the fascinating things about the cathedral is that they knew what they wanted to do, but they had to build it in reverse. So I will show you what we call the boss stones. The boss stones actually contain the Nicene Creed from beginning to end, but they built it from end to beginning, if that makes sense. They had to build everything in reverse. They built it as funds were allowed. Let me go back, Washington Cathedral. So that was our name for most of our history. The national part, most people are confused and think that it's part of the federal government. It's actually not. We received no funding from the federal government, never have, never will. In fact, we aren't even able to receive money from the government, because if we were to take government money, they would say that you have to promise not to use it on religious spending. And, well, we can't really do that. So everything at the cathedral is privately raised. All the money that it took to build it was also privately raised from groups around the country. They would build it in sections from east to west, but you can see that in that middle photo there, down the bottom, they had laid out the entire foundation for the building well before they ever got to that part of construction. So they knew what it was supposed to be and how big it was going to be, even before it was constructed. Medieval construction techniques. Everything is built by hand. There's no steel reinforcement. The only thing holding the place together is mortar and gravity and weight. It is a modern building. By cathedral standards, it's actually fairly young, but it is built as they would have in the 14th century. That has slightly changed a little bit, and I'll talk about that with the earthquake, but the actual building itself is Gothic in design and Gothic built. You see this picture here of the gentleman carrying a log. Those logs were what they used to roll the stones from place to place. And that's how medieval cathedrals were built. They didn't have pulleys or cranes necessarily, but they had logs, and so they would put a series of logs on the ground and push it on down. And that's a technique that they were doing as late as the 70s. The building itself was built by two sort of groups of laborers. One was what they just called laborers, and they were working class, a lot of them black, construction guys. The other category were the artisans and the craftsmen, and they were largely Italian, and a few that had come over from England. But most of the artisans, the stone carvers, came from Italy and then spent the rest of their careers at the cathedral. If you look at that center picture there, you can see a guy with a beard. That's Dieter Goldkuhl. His family had been designing churches or church furnishings, altarpieces, stained glass windows, since the 1600s in Germany. He came over, heard that there was this cathedral being built, and pestered them until they gave him a job. Went on to install 62 windows, and his son now is the, I think, 7th generation, who is our stained glass window guy. So there's a lot of family legacy at the cathedral. This is the picture of the laying of the last stone that Tony referred to, September 29th, 1990, 83 years to the day. The gentleman there in the hard hat, that's Joe Alonzo. He is still our head stonemason. He put the last stone on the cathedral, and now he's rebuilding the cathedral from the earthquake that we had in 2011. So he's still there. Gargoyles, we have about 120 functioning gargoyles. Well, we have 120 gargoyles. All of them are functioning, let me put it that way. And what they are designed to do is to divert water away from the building. And the worst thing that you can have for stone is water to get into the stone. So gargoyles are whimsical, and they're kind of scary, and they're artistic, but they are also 100% functional. And one thing that's interesting about them is they work in teams together. So you have at the top of the building, you have a gargoyle who spits water down to the next level. The water collects, and then the mid-level gargoyle takes it and spits it down to the lower level. And then the lower level gargoyle spits it out onto the ground. So it's a whole system. President Bush and First Lady Barbara Bush on September 29th, 1990, They were actually, since we're in Texas, fairly good friends of the cathedral. When he was vice president, the vice president lives about 3 blocks away. He would come fairly frequently for Sunday services. And when he died, there was no question but that he would have his funeral at the cathedral. He had specified that. So I mentioned presidents at the cathedral. Here you have pictures of everyone from Franklin Roosevelt all the way up to Joe Biden. We have a tradition of hosting inaugural prayer services on the day after the presidential inauguration. And that started with Franklin Roosevelt in 1933. That's the photo there on the top left. And the most recent one that we did in 2021 with President Biden was also during COVID, and that was a completely virtual service. But the president, first lady, and vice president, and first gentleman, or second gentleman, all joined the service from the East Room of the White House and watched it on TV. So the tradition stayed, the mechanics of it have changed. Joe Biden has been with us, I believe, 7 times for 7 funerals. The man loves to come for a funeral. Yeah, he's been quite a regular presence. So, August 23rd, 2011, you all are used to hurricanes, you know what to do. We are not used to earthquakes. And in 2011, we had a 5.8 magnitude earthquake on the East Coast. The 2 most heavily damaged structures were the National Cathedral and the Washington Monument. Washington Monument opened fairly quickly because they had federal government money to help speed along the repairs. The cathedral suffered $40 million in damage. No earthquake insurance, because why would you have that in Washington, D.C.? And so we are in the final stretches of still working on this earthquake project. So the cathedral was finished. It was pristine for 21 years, and then we had to restart building it all over again. We are about $1 million away from having all of the money that we need to finally finish the earthquake work. The cathedral is covered in scaffolding, and it's ugly, we don't like it, but we realize that actually there's been scaffolding on the cathedral much longer than there hasn't been, so it's just kind of routine for us. You can see there, when the earthquake hit, if you know anything about earthquakes, imagine a whip, and when you crack a whip, and those seismic waves sort of move up and down, right? But ultimately, they're looking for a place for that energy to release. So what did the earthquake do? It traveled through the city to the to the highest hill, right? And then it went all the way up to the tallest place in Washington it could find, the top of the tower. And by the time those seismic waves got to the top of the tower, they basically exploded. And so we had pinnacles and finials and all sorts of things that just fell. Strangely, nobody was hurt. Nothing, the physical structure of the building itself maintained its role, but Gothic cathedrals weren't really built for earthquakes. So we have spent the last 13 years shoring up the building. So you can see on the left there, they are redoing every piece that was damaged, and they're doing it the original way by hand. And it's all from the same quarry in Indiana that we got the original limestone from. They're also using a robot on the right to help speed it along and also cut down repair. So if you imagine a giant block of limestone that needs to be carved into this really delicate, intricate finial, that would take them years to actually chisel it. What the robot does is it does a 3D scan of what we want to build, programs it, they turn it on, come back the next day, and that block of limestone is 80% finished. And then it gets shipped back to the cathedral, and then our stone carvers do all the fine finishing by hand, but that has changed. But that's a time saver and a money saver.
Do they use hydraulics to do the carving with the robot, the high pressure water?
Yeah, the question was, do they use hydraulics for the carving? Yes, it's a diamond chisel basically, and then it's fed by water.
Oh, okay, so they don't use the water pressure itself,
No,
but the water keeps the diamond head cool.
right, and it keeps the dust down, yeah. So there's Joe. There, he's still building, still putting things up in very, very high places. But yeah, it's a big project. So even though the cathedral's finished, we're still rebuilding it.
What did Joe do for the 21 years between the time that it was finished and the earthquake?
So, yeah, so what does a stone carver do every day between, when he's not fixing? So it's a lot of, it's a giant stone building, and giant stone buildings need constant attention. So things need to be repointed, stones need to be repaired, water damage, if there's a leak in the roof and the water comes down, all that stone needs to be cleaned. And but he also, because he's been there now 40 years, he knows every single crack of the building. So when we do a state funeral and the Secret Service comes to do the security sweep, Joe is actually the one that leads them around because he knows literally where everything is. So the central tower there, you can see, that's the last piece that needs to be done. That's what we're raising the money for now. Once we get the money, we still estimate it's going to be 4 to 5 years of work because that is 350 feet off the ground, and they can only work about 6 months out of the year because that right there is about the windiest spot in Washington. And so you can't have people up there in the middle of the winter because they will get blown off. So it's just going to take some time. This is one of our favorite stories. During the earthquake, and this is a really good view of a gargoyle, he was hit by a piece of falling stone from the tower up above and almost got decapitated, but you can see the metal water pipe that saved his head. And he hung out there for about 6 months until they were able to get basically a ladder high enough to go reach him. And this past summer, he has now been fully reunited with his body. And there you can see Joe sticking the head back on with a very, very, very heavy-duty epoxy. But what they had to do is they had to shave basically his head and then shave his body to create a clean seal. And then covered it with this really, really sticky glue, and it worked. So he's now pouring water again.
How long did he have to hold it there?
Actually, so that glue dries pretty quickly.
Okay.
So he didn't actually have to hold it there very long.
Is there a columbarium associated with it?
Is there a columbarium associated? Yes, there are about 200 people who are buried in the cathedral. Most of them is in a columbarium, with cremains and ashes. Yeah, about 200, and that's down in the crypt. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, we added an outdoor one that actually has unlimited capacity because it's in the natural earth. So, yeah. So here you can see some of our fun gargoyles. Call your attention to the one at the bottom left. That is Darth Vader. It actually is Darth Vader. 1986, we had a contest with the National Geographic Kids magazine. As the towers were being built and kids around the country submitted designs, they picked the top 4. Vader actually came in 4th, but they carved the top 4. He is now the most searched word on our website. And if you Google Darth Vader National Cathedral on YouTube, you will find a video of someone you may have met tonight wandering around the cathedral as Darth Vader at work. So. Oh, good question. Where is Darth Vader located? He's on so if you're looking at the front of the cathedral, he's on the left tower, but he's on the north side, which we all know is also the dark side. So here you can see this, on the towers, we have about 400 angels, including one holding an Oscar statue. That's another story. But each of these were carved, and you can't see them from the ground. But the idea was that angels are in heaven, and you can't see them from here either. So, yeah, but that is the level of artistry that is that high off the ground. These are my two favorite. Okay, so a little education for you. A grotesque and a gargoyle, okay? A grotesque is a carving. It could be an animal, it could be a person, it could be a fanciful creature, but it's just a carving. A gargoyle is a grotesque that has a water pipe in its mouth. So gargoyles are basically functional, grotesques are decorative. These are my two favorite at the cathedral. The one on the left is a mouth trying to eat the building. And the one on the right is a spy camera that was installed in the 1980s at the height of the Cold War that is pointed at the Russian embassy down the street. Yeah. So, we talked about the stories that the cathedral tells. These are some of the stories that we tell. Rosa Parks on the left, top left, Elie Wiesel at the bottom left, Mother Teresa, and Eleanor Roosevelt. This is in a part of the cathedral that's dedicated to people who gave their lives and their careers for human rights. This is the Elie Wiesel carving. This is the newest carving in the cathedral. This was installed in 2021. And I'm happy to pass this around. I asked Joe, our stonemason, I said, I need to bring something to this talk that you won't be offended if it breaks or gets chipped in my luggage. So he had an extra one of these. So he said, you can take this, bring it back if you can, but if you don't, that's fine. So, but if you want to, I'll pass it around and you can take a look, but all of this was carved by hand. And this was done in consultation with the Wiesel family. He's the first modern Jew who's depicted in the cathedral, again, that house of prayer for all people. And then my favorite part of this story is we worked closely with the Wiesel family and with his widow. They gave us photos to work with, and then they approved sketches of, yeah, that doesn't look like him, yeah, that looks like him. His wife was most concerned with how his eyes came across. And we're getting close to installation, and we had worked with a number of Jewish groups and with the Holocaust Museum on this, and the Orthodox rabbis came to take a look. And Elie Wiesel was an Orthodox rabbi, or Orthodox Jew. And they're like, it's your cathedral, do what you want, but we have a thing about graven images. It's not the best idea in Judaism. They said, however, in good rabbinical fashion, if you introduce an error into the carving, then it is no longer a graven image because it's imperfect. So if you were to go see this at the cathedral, you'll notice there's a chip in his neck, right around his clavicle, where they took a whack at the stone. And so that is the imperfection that is there that allowed the Orthodox rabbis to bless it. So I'll pass this around.
Is that the stonemason putting the chip in the neck right there?
Is that the stonemason putting the chip in the neck? That's him finishing the fine carving, and then not too long after, he put the chip in the neck. Martin Luther King. You see his sculpture there on the left, which was based on the appearance here on March 31st, 1968. And if you know anything about that week, that was a Sunday in 1968. That Thursday in 1968, he was assassinated in Memphis. So he preached his final Sunday sermon at the cathedral. We're the only place that has had 3 generations of kings all preach at the cathedral. Dr. King, his son Martin III, and then his daughter Yolanda have all preached at the cathedral. Helen Keller is buried at the cathedral. A lot of people don't know that. Part of the reason why she's buried there is because she insisted that she was going to be buried with Annie Sullivan, her teacher. Annie Sullivan was buried there first. So, but when she died in 1936, the cathedral was one of the few places that was large enough to accommodate her very large funeral. So, many of you probably know the story of Matthew Shepard. You knew him? Okay. So Matthew Shepard, if you're not familiar, in 1998, was a gay college student in Wyoming who was beaten, tied to a fence in the middle of the winter and left to die, and eventually succumbed to his injuries. And it really sort of electrified the gay rights movement. And his parents didn't know what to do with him because they didn't want to put him anywhere where his gravesite could be desecrated. So they held on to his ashes for 20 years, had no idea what to do. And in 2018, we got connected with them at the cathedral, and he is now interred at the cathedral, and his gravesite has become a sort of a pilgrimage site for many members of the LGBT community. And every year on December 1st, which is his birthday, we hold an annual service. That's his father, Dennis, in installing the memorial plaque. So you have a $43 million repair bill for earthquake. How do you raise that money? Part of what we're doing is we are building the cathedral out of Legos. And it is going to be about 500,000 Legos. And if you don't know how big 500,000, how many that is, that's a lot. The way that it works is people pay $2 a brick. So if you give $10, you get 5 bricks, and then you can put them on the model with a volunteer builder. And by the time this is done, it will be bigger than a minivan. And it will be the largest Lego build ever assembled from a set of instructions. Is it on the site? It's being built. If you're familiar at all with the cathedral, in the back of the nave, where the gift shop used to be. Yes.
Are there any plans to sell it as a Lego set proper? Because
So, yeah, are we going to try to sell the set, sell it as a set? We would love to. As it turns out, Lego corporate has a policy where they don't design religious buildings because it's a little too controversial. And what's interesting is Lego itself has actually nothing to do with the project. We had to work with a third-party company who does this for a living, and they buy all the bricks for us, ship them, write the instructions, but it's all Lego pieces. So you can see this is our rose window. That's 2,000 Lego pieces right there in the rose window. Each one of those columns has about 900 pieces in it. This is one of my favorite spots in the cathedral, in the great choir, which is where the high altar is. It gives you just a glimpse of the craftsmanship of the place. So these are the ends of the pews in the great choir. And each one of them tells a story. And some of them are more obvious than others. You've got the 3 wise men. You've got Moses in the bulrushes down in the bottom left. And then that is St. George slaying the dragon, and a wolf in sheep's clothing. So I just wrote about these for the Cathedral magazine, and I discovered a new word, a Festiculon. Does anyone know what that is? And it's a medieval legend about a giant sea turtle that would emerge from the water, and the sailors would think that it was an island. And so they would hop on its back, and then it would sink and drag them to their death. And it's an allegory for Satan tempting those who he wants to destroy. So lots of hidden symbolism. Also, one of the places, if you want to see iron work, it is a site for iron. Every one of those petals and flowers and things of grapes, those are all hand pounded. Each one of those leaves takes about 4 hours to make, just for a leaf. Our organ, one of the largest in the country, 10,647 pipes, also 85 years old. And we are in the process of completely rebuilding the organ because after 85 years, about a third of it didn't work. And the night before George Bush's presidential funeral, it decided to die. And then they found someone who could fix it. But it was just beyond its natural life. But we're in the process, so by the end of this decade, we should have the earthquake repairs done and also a brand-new organ that will last us for 100 years. Yes?
Who's the manufacturer of that organ?
So the organ itself is a Skinner. Yeah. And yes, I've learned to be very careful talking about the organ because people know a lot more than I do. But it's originally a 1938 Skinner, and it's being fixed by the Foley Baker Company in Connecticut. And they're going to reuse as much of the original as they can, and the pieces that are too far gone, they will put in new ones.
Yeah, the organ there was expanded and greatly enlarged in 1972 to 1976.
Yeah, so the organ, it's a very cathedral story. So when they put the organ in 1938, the building was only a third complete. And so the organ that we had was not built for the size building that we have. And so over the intervening decades, they would add something here, add something there, and it was a hodgepodge of different systems that were never meant to be together. But as the building grew, the organ had to grow too. So what we will finally have is an organ that is specifically designed to be able to fill the space. And what that actually means is we're going to have to add more pipes towards the back so that people can hear it. This window here is probably our most famous window, just celebrated its 50th birthday this summer. This is our space window. So in the mid-level of these stained glass windows, they honor all different professions. So there's one for architects, and there's one for musicians, and there's one for writers, and there's one for doctors and nurses. This one is actually the scientists and technicians window. We all call it the space window. So if you look at that big red circle, you'll see kind of a blue circle in the middle of that, and then a dark circle there. That dark circle is actually a piece of the moon that was brought back by Apollo 11. There's a whole story about how we got it, but suffice it to say that too got caught up in Washington politics. But it's probably our most famous window. A lot of people ask about the flowers. Where do you get those flowers? Every flower arrangement in the cathedral is done in the cathedral by volunteers. We have a flower guild that is about 150 people, and this is all they do. Everything, even for weddings and funerals, everything is done by our in-house flower shop, and it actually is like a flower shop. But in total, we have about 850 volunteers at the cathedral, and that is what allows the cathedral to function, is all the volunteers that do that. If you have not been to the cathedral, put Easter at the cathedral on your bucket list. Definitely worth the trip. It's beautiful. Anything that will stand still will have flowers attached to it. I believe last year they did 85 different arrangements. It's a big building. You have to. But it is between the music and the worship and the flowers. It's unlike anything you've ever seen. definitely worth the trip. So I talked a little bit about the story of the cathedral and how they had to build it in reverse, right? So most medieval cathedrals, if you were to walk up to the front, you would typically see an image of the Last Judgment. And that was to kind of put you in your place and to remind you of where you were going. This cathedral, obviously Gothic, right? And it's very typical that way. But the scheme for it is different. And what they wanted to do was start at the moment of creation and then move through time and end at the redemption of the world on the other end. So they had to build that in reverse. So the front of the building was the last thing to be built, but it starts here at the moment of creation. So, pop quiz. Does anybody know the official name of the cathedral?
The Cathedral of Saints Peter and Paul.
Very good, very close. The official name, the Cathedral Church of St. Peter and St. Paul in the City and Diocese of Washington. That's a mouthful. That's why we don't use it very much. That's why we go by the National Cathedral. But yeah, it's technically St. Peter and St. Paul Cathedral. And so on the left here, you see St. Peter. And on the right, you see St. Paul. And this is the moment when they were called by Jesus and became new creations. And so the moment, the front of the building starts with this idea of creation, including the creation of conversion. And in the middle there, you have Adam as the first human, and then what we call the jacuzzi above, which is the creation of man. If you were to look on the Peter side, you see the creation of day, and then the creation of night on the other. So the whole building, the story of the building starts with the moment of creation from the minute you walk in through the doors. This is the stained glass window that's directly above, the one that we made out of Legos. And this is called the creation window, because this is the moment when God said, "Let there be light," and light radiated across the universe. So again, that's the first thing you see, is the moment of creation.
What year was that window finished? Because when I went in 1980, the window wasn't in yet, but the framework for it was.
It was dedicated in 1976, when the nave was completed, the interior of the nave. Yes?
Out of curiosity, what is the reasoning for building in reverse?
What is the reasoning for building in reverse? That's a really good question. It's a really good question. I don't know. Yeah, well, part of it, if I had to guess, the space that they most wanted to have was the high altar, right? And that's at the far eastern end of the building. So they knew it's hard to have a cathedral if you don't have an altar, right? So they knew that they had to get that part built. Directly below the altar is Bethlehem Chapel, which is the oldest part of the cathedral. And that's where the cathedral operated, basically, for the first 20, 30 years of its life. So it started, I think to answer your question, they had to have a place to meet first, right? So they had to build a space, and they figured, well, let's build it on the space where we're actually going to need the thing the first, which would be the altar right above it, so.
Can you talk about weddings there?
Weddings, yes. So technically, anybody can get married at the cathedral. Ultimately, the dean of the cathedral has final say, but it's very unusual that we would say no. The main reason why people might not get married at the cathedral is the calendar is really, really full, tends to book 3 to 4 years in advance, and frankly, the cost, because in order to have a wedding at the cathedral, you basically have to close down the entire cathedral. So that's a day's worth of operations. So it costs about $80,000 a day to operate the cathedral. Now, that doesn't mean that a wedding costs $80,000, but to give you a sense of the scale, it's about $80,000 per day to keep the place running.
Well, who has been married in the cathedral?
Somebody asked me that earlier today. It tends to be, rather than the famous, it's sort of like the children of the famous. So Al Gore's daughter got married there. Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, his son got married there. Any of you listen to public radio? Diane Rehm, do you know that name? She, longtime radio host. She got married there. We tend to be known more for the funerals of the VIPs rather than the weddings.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the funerals, weddings you have to pay for, obviously. The funerals, is that sort of a, especially like a presidential, is it a public service that you get paid for those, or is that?
So I'll talk about state funerals because that's the cleanest. There's a cost-sharing arrangement between the cathedral and the federal government, because technically, a state funeral is multiple things at once. It is a religious service, right? It is a military event. It is a broadcast event, and it is a high-stakes security event. Did I say that already? TV broadcast, funeral, military, and funeral. So all of those things so in order to pull that off, just the level of security, so a presidential funeral at the cathedral has the same level of security that the Super Bowl does, to give you an example. So there's a cost sharing. That's the only time the federal government ever flows, federal money ever flows to the cathedral. I just wanted to mention, so I told you how the building was built in reverse, and they had to know what the scheme was before they even built it. These boss stones here, these are like, if you were to look at the arches in the cathedral, where the arch meets in like a keystone is what's called a boss stone. And these boss stones are all carved in place, upside down, and they had to be designed in advance. But they tell the Nicene Creed from beginning to end. And the idea there was that the spiritual architecture of the building is as important as the physical. This is the high altar, again, all hand carved, but there's a special thing for you all here. So the cathedral itself is all built from Indiana limestone. This reredos, which is the screen behind the altar, is actually French limestone. But you'll notice the figure of Jesus there in the middle. Does anybody want to guess where Jesus came from? Texas, yes. So we say that Jesus was from Texas, yeah. Which sounds like something a Texan might say, actually. Sorry, not sorry. So there are 110 figures carved into this part of the altar. And some of them are famous, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and some of them are saints that you've never heard of. But I wanted to call your attention to these 6. These are actually anonymous saints. They're not designed to represent any particular person who has ever lived. But they are from Matthew 25, where Jesus says, "When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was naked, you clothed me." And the idea is that those virtues, those spiritual practices, are as important as anything else or anyone else that's depicted there. So it's sort of let's bring this all down to earth a little bit. Stories told in the cathedral, obviously through statues, but also through needlework. And this is where we get into the American story a little bit. So that's Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, Frank Lloyd Wright, and Thomas Edison. All stories told in the cathedral. I'm going to just skip ahead. The fascinating thing about these two twin narratives is that they are often told on top of each other. So these are some of our stained glass windows. These are actually about 35, 40 feet high. They're huge. They don't look so big on the screen. The one on the left is the story of Job. The one on the right is a story from the Old Testament about the development of the Hebrew people. But if you look closely, let's start the one on the left. That's the story of the suffering of Job. And if you look around the outside, you might notice it's actually set against an American military cemetery. And that was paid for by members of the American Legion, which you can see here at the bottom right. The one in the middle there about the development of the Hebrew nation in the Old Testament, if you look at the very top, you'll see an image of the U.S. Capitol. And the idea was that as the Hebrew nation developed, so was the American nation developed. And so there's a series of windows that has the White House, the Supreme Court, and the Capitol. We have some famous presidents there. I want to talk just real quickly here. Woodrow Wilson is the only president buried in Washington, D.C., and he's buried here at the cathedral. There's a whole story there, happy to tell you. I was telling Tony earlier. Woodrow Wilson is a complicated guy, all right? And I think in the last 5 to 10 years, people have sort of realized how complicated he is. He is somebody who did a lot of good. He led us through World War I. He established the National Park Service, the Internal Revenue Service. Well, maybe that wasn't so good. But he was, a very successful president. And when he died, he was considered one of the 4 most important presidents, along with Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln at the time. There's a slightly different understanding of him now. We now know that he was kind of an unrepentant racist, and that there were actions taken or not taken during his time in office that actively pushed Black America back. So at the height of the George Floyd protests, people said, well, are you going to dig up Woodrow Wilson? He doesn't belong in the cathedral. The answer is no. We are not in the business of disturbing graves. His body and his soul was commended to God and put into that place, and we're not going to get in the middle of that. How we talk about him, how we understand him, that has changed. And so I'll talk to you real quick in just a minute. We are getting close to time. So this sketch here, this is the sketch for Woodrow Wilson's tomb at the cathedral. The draftsman on this sketch was actually a Black woman in the 1950s named Martha Cassell Thompson, completely unknown. And one of the projects I'm working on is figuring out who she is, and it's taken me a long time. But I guess what I want to tell you is as we are talking about Woodrow Wilson, we're also talking about Martha Thompson, that there are 2 stories embedded in that space, and that and I think I'll just end it here. Woodrow Wilson was a good man who also did bad things. And the Episcopalians here in the room will know what I'm talking about the via media, right? The middle way. And the idea that human beings are both capable of great good and also tempted by great evil. And that it's not one or the other. You're not all bad or all good. There's a mix. And so as we are telling a full story, we're also telling a full story about people like Woodrow Wilson and making room for the story of people like Martha Thompson. So in the cathedral, there is only one person who is beyond reproach, and that's the guy on the cross. Everybody else in that cathedral, every person that's depicted, every saint, every sinner, every politician, Lord knows, all sinners that are in need of grace. And so what we are trying to do at the cathedral is recognize that all of the people in the cathedral are flawed, except for one, and that to really understand them, we have to engage with them and engage with their stories and understand, yeah, they did some great things, yeah, they did some things that we weren't so proud of, but that it is both sides. And so we're trying to strike that via media and understand humanity in its complexity. So I am at time. Happy to answer any questions afterwards, but Tony, a few questions. Any questions?
think it was designed for acoustics as well. Because when I first walked in there, I was standing in the very back of the cathedral, and the organist was playing the softest stops in the organ, and I could hear it very clear in the back.
Yeah. So the question was about, the cathedral being designed as an acoustically, a good acoustics place. Yes and no. When the cathedral was actually built and people started using it, there was no sound system. There was no amplification. So all you had was the organ, the choir, and a really loud preacher. A building like that, sound tends to echo, and it will echo off. And stone, as you know, is not a soft surface. So there's, it echoes a lot. And there's actually, I believe it's 1.2 seconds for the sound to travel from the front of the cathedral to the back. So when people are singing, sometimes people at the front are singing something different from people at the back. So yeah, there are amazing acoustics. So if you have an a cappella choir, it's amazing. If you have people singing or preaching, it gets a little bit more complicated. One of the things that we are trying to do is we are at the end of a comprehensive campaign to raise $150 million for the cathedral to address the earthquake and a number of other projects. And we're almost there, the organ. But one of the things that we need to do is redo the sound system in the nave, because it's so old that they don't make the parts anymore. And so we can't actually fix it. Our video system, up until a few years ago, was literally run through a VCR. We had a donor step forward and offer to help us do a new one. That launched in September of 2019. 5 months later, COVID hit. And when COVID hit and churches closed down, we were already equipped to do online church. And so that first Sunday, or the first Easter of COVID, we had 60,000 people with us for Easter Sunday online, because we had the technology to be able to do it. So on any given Sunday now, we will have 800 to 1,000 people in the cathedral, depending, and we'll have between 3,000 and 5,000 people online. On an average Sunday, we have 6 of 7 continents represented in real time. So it's changed a lot. Someone, yeah?
You said that when the earthquake hit, fortunately, no one was injured. About how many people were in the cathedral at that time?
Yeah, how many people were in the cathedral when the earthquake hit? Actually, not many, because it was August, and August in DC is a ghost town. There were people working, and we did have some tours going on, but it was a Tuesday afternoon at 2 o'clock, so it was relatively empty, which was actually good. Yeah, that helped. The bells in the tower actually started ringing themselves. Yes?
Is there like a specific place that we can, like if we wanted to donate, is there like a website or something we can go to?
You're my new best friend. Yeah, so you can make any kind of donation at cathedral.org. If you want to be part of the campaign, and I should mention, every dollar given during the course of the campaign, whether it's $1 or $500,000, it all counts. And that's just cathedral.org/campaign. Yeah. Yes?
The bells, you said, in the towers, are they done like by rope, by people?
How do the bells work? Yes. So we are actually one of 2 cathedrals in the world to have 2 completely different sets of bells. The other one is in England. I can't remember which one. But there are peal bells that are pulled on ropes. And those are, if you imagine the cascading bell sound that you would hear from a cathedral, like if you ever watched the BBC when after a royal wedding you hear those cascading bells, that's what that is. Those are rung by groups of 10 who are all volunteers. And in order to ring all 10 bells in all possible combinations of 1 through 10 and then 10 through whatever, takes 3 hours and 15 minutes. And that's called a full peal. They do that twice a year on New Year's and Easter. Usually they'll do something much shorter on a Sunday. And then directly below that, we have a carillon, which is 52 bells that functions basically like a really big piano. So there's a console with keyboards, and instead of playing with your fingers, you play with your fists. And each note is connected to a different bell. So that one, you can actually play any piece of music that you want. So when the Washington Nationals went to the World Series in 2019, right, that was against Houston, wasn't it? Okay, when we won the the series, we played "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" on the bells. We also played "Baby Shark" on the organ, but in 1996, when the Olympics were in Atlanta, when the flame came running down Wisconsin Avenue, he played the Olympic theme on the bells in the tower as the flame was coming down. We've done Harry Potter. You can do, Happy Birthday, Merry Christmas, any song really. So 2 sets of bells. Yes.
2 quick questions. Who decides who gets to go up who gets a bust in the hall, the people that have lived in service to others that you showed us? Who makes the decision who gets to go up?
Yeah, who gets to decide who gets depicted in the cathedral, right? Ultimately, it's the dean, but as you can imagine, it's a church, there's lots of committees, nothing happens by accident, right? Typically there will be, often it starts with a donor who might come forward and say, I would like to memorialize X, Y, or Z. We actually we're doing a new one right now. We had a group of deacons who wanted to put in a statue to honor the service of deacons in the church. Saint Phoebe, it turns out, is the patron saint of deacons. So we are in the process of carving a new statue of Saint Phoebe. So that started with, like a donor, but ultimately the dean approves who it is and what the design looks like. Elie Wiesel here, that was the dean's call. He said, I want to put Elie Wiesel in the cathedral. Yeah.
Thank you. The other quick question was, on my visit, I remembered and took pictures of all the needlepoint cushions. That was stunning to me. Do you still continue those? Are there more stories to tell or places to put them? Or are you just kind of...
The needlepoint collection, I mean, there's a number of them. There are benches and there's, kneelers and things like that. The one that most people tend to notice is the ones that I showed you of famous Americans. That collection stopped in about 1970, give or take. We haven't added anybody new other than presidents. Every president gets a needlepoint cushion. We just added the Bush one not too long ago. One of the things that we're going to be doing, or hope to be doing, is we have just signed on as a founding partner with America 250, which is the official commission to celebrate the semi-quincentennial in 2026, our 250th birthday. So we're a founding partner. One of the projects that we're going to try to do is to imagine who needs to be honored in that collection who isn't currently there. And it's either going to be a call for submissions and we'll display, people's ideas. Some of them might get made, some of them, we haven't gotten that far yet. But the idea is, who has died since 1970, whatever, who's not there? And who's worthy? Walt Disney, maybe? Jim Henson? Maya Angelou? So we're going to, part of what we're hoping to do for America's 250th is to expand that needlepoint collection to tell more stories. Last one?
Okay, well, going back to the bells,
Yes.
the movie Niagara with Marilyn Monroe,
Okay.
there's a scene in that movie where you can hear the bells in some church in Niagara. It sounds beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sounds of the bells. I don't know how people see the movie Niagara, but
Yeah, so
it's worth watching.
the bells play every week. So on Saturdays, there's a carillon recital, the big piano, if you will. And then the carillon plays before church, and then the peal bells play after church. One of the projects that I worked on during COVID was how do we memorialize the lives that we lost, the million-plus lives that we lost to COVID. And at every 100,000 deaths, we would toll the funeral bell once for every 10,000 victims. By the time we got to the end, at 1 million, I think it took us about an hour and a half to toll the bell for every 10,000 people that had died.
How about 9/11?
So 9/11, we in the days after 9/11, we were the site of the big national prayer service. I think like a lot of the rest of the country, it's not an annual event in the same way that it once was, but like on Sunday, they included it in the prayers, and then that was what, yesterday? Yesterday, they had it in the noonday prayers and things like that, so, yeah. Okay?
Thank you so much for being with us.
Sure. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming and visiting with us. The pin, as a token of our gratitude, is a pin made from the tree from the wood of the Rachel tree on the grounds of the museum. Two little things. I forgot to acknowledge Mitch Smith's presence here. He's on our board, and I overlooked that. And somebody asked who gets married at the National Cathedral. And those of you who know James and Judy Black, their son Will was married, and I got to go to that wedding. So it makes for a very memorable wedding, I'll say that. So thank you all so much for being with us tonight. We hope you'll take a look at the upcoming programming and come again. Thank you so much.